And thank you so much for joining us live from Ohio's North Coast, Cleveland, Ohio, where tonight the Terminal Tower is lit up in red, white, and blue for a very special night of political debate ahead of Ohio's primary election scheduled for March 19th. I'm Wayne Dawson in the studios of WJW TV Fox 8, and we are glad to bring you tonight's debate. And you are watching this on air and online from one of our 6 Nexstar media stations throughout the state of Ohio. We are broadcasting live from Cleveland to Columbus, Dayton, Youngstown, Steubenville, and the Huntington, Charleston, West Virginia market that serves the southeastern portion of the state of Ohio. You have met the 3 candidates taking part in tonight's debate, and now it's time to meet the moderators. Colleen Marshall from NBC4 in Columbus, and Joe Toohey from Fox 8 right here in Cleveland. Take it away, guys.
Thank you, Wayne, and welcome to our candidates and to all of you who are watching across the state.
You can follow along using the hashtag OHGOPSendDebate. You'll find additional information supporting tonight's questions. First, let's start with a quick rundown of the rules for our debate so you at home can know what to expect. Each candidate will get 60 seconds to answer a question. If there's a follow-up or rebuttal, the candidate will have 30 seconds to answer that, and then 15 seconds for a clarification if needed.
We will be reminding the candidates throughout the night of those times, and the sound of a bell will ring when their time is up.
Now the candidates will answer in an order determined by a random drawing, and we want to start with the topic of immigration. 2023 saw a record number of crossings at the U.S. southern border. You all agree that the wall should be built, cartels should be designated terror organizations. Some Republican officials have also called for mass deportations of undocumented migrants that are currently in the country. The question, what specifically would you do to secure the southern border, and would you support Republican calls for mass deportation? Mr. Marino, you got the lucky draw. You're up first here. You have 60 seconds.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate you doing this debate. I couldn't answer this question without acknowledging somebody who's not watching here, which is my mom, passed away last June. She gave me the gift of bringing me to this country legally. What we are seeing coming across our southern border is completely unacceptable. I call it treasonous. It's an invasion of our country. You laid out some of the things that need to be done, but we have to have a zero tolerance for illegal immigration. That means we cannot allow any form of amnesty. So yes, like President Trump, who's endorsed me in this race, I believe that we should make certain that we deport anybody who is in this country illegally. If we fail to do that, what we will do is continue to encourage bad behavior and having people come here into this country illegally. We have to honor and respect what it takes to come into this country illegally. It's the only way for us to permanently fix the problem at the border.
Thank you, Mr. Marino. Mr. Dolan, you're up next on this question of what to do with undocumented migrants that are in the country right now, and how would you secure the southern border? You have 60 seconds.
Thank you. Thanks for hosting, and thanks for joining us. First, I've been consistent. We must secure and seal the border. Build a wall where necessary. Add technology. Give Border Authority the legal authority to act. Remain in Mexico and work with the Mexican government to take care of the cartels. Look, we have got to seal our border. We have got to stop people coming into our border. Only then can we then have a talk about what we're going to do, work with our employers to make sure that they have people. If you are a criminal, you're gone. But here's what I want to say. Look, it's no wonder that Bernie wants to put a position over this campaign that I don't hold. But he doesn't want you to know where he stood before he was a Senate candidate. He worked with the Mike Bloomberg organization to ask President Obama for a path to citizenship. He wanted a path to diversity, residency. He won awards in Cleveland for these positions. Now that he wants your vote in a Republican primary, he wants to militarize the federal government and deport children.
Mr. Marino, I'm going to give you 15 seconds here to respond to that. We are going to come with another follow-up to you, but you can respond to Mr. Dolan.
Yeah, I mean, it's silly season. I certainly won awards for that position. What's remarkable is that the position that Matt holds today is that we should give amnesty to illegal immigrants. That's what's remarkable. Somebody who's been in politics virtually his entire life still believes that amnesty is the right answer.
Okay, we will be coming back around, but Mr. LaRose, I want to bring you in on this. The same question, this question of securing the border and what do you do with undocumented migrants that are in the country right now, mass deportations. You have 60 seconds.
Yeah, thank you, Colleen and Joe, and thank you to my fellow Ohioans for the chance to have this job interview. This one, for me, is a matter of personal experience. I volunteered to be part of a counter-narcotics task force serving on the U.S.-Mexican border. I was there over 20 years ago and saw what a disaster it was then. It's a full-scale invasion now. I called on President Biden earlier today, and I hope you'll see the plan that I put out, to deploy 3 military divisions to the U.S.-Mexican border because we must stop the bleeding. And that is something that could be done within a matter of days, really. After that, it means building the wall. It means completing President Trump's wall all the way from the Gulf of Mexico to the Pacific Ocean. It also means no amnesty. If your first act in this country is to break our laws, you should never be rewarded with citizenship, birthright citizenship, any government benefits. We don't want to secure the border because we hate the people on the other side. We want to secure the border because we love our country, and it's drugs and crime that are pouring across that border that are killing our fellow Americans. We must act now.
Thank you, Mr. LaRose. And Mr. Marino, we do want to follow up on this topic. In a 2016 interview in New American Economy, you called for a pathway to citizenship and said, quote, the goal is to help them become Americans. So what's changed? 30 seconds.
Sure. What's changed is we've had 8.5 million people cross into this country illegally over the last 3 years. We've seen this full-scale invasion of our border. I wasn't somebody who was in public office back then. What's remarkable is that you just heard 2 Republicans go against what President Trump is saying,
False.
Which is that we have to deport these people. Now, what Frank will say, because like every politician is very slick, he's saying that deport people who came here during Biden. I'm saying deport anybody who's here illegally. He's redefining amnesty as meaning staying here and getting government benefits or becoming a citizen. Amnesty means anybody who's here illegally has to be deported.
I'm going to give you 10 seconds to respond to that, Mr. LaRose, since he called you out.
Yeah, this is a slick sales pitch from a guy that has changed his view on this. I've been clear about no amnesty. Of course, we're going to start with the Biden invasion, and then we'll deport everyone that we can who's come here illegally. No question about it.
So if you go on Twitter, look at what he said just 3 months ago in Medina, where he said you can't do that because you can't take 20 million consumers out of the marketplace.
All right,
so
Mr.
again,
Marino, we're going to move on.
This is important to draw that distinction because both of them will favor amnesty because both of them have that opinion. Well, he says it's false, so go fact check it yourself.
Now to Mr. Dolan, and our follow-up question for you. You have said that fentanyl is, quote, a weapon of mass destruction. But according to Customs and Border Patrol data, nearly 90% of the fentanyl that comes into this country comes in through legal points of entry, like the ones that you will see here. What action would you take at legal points of entry to address the crisis? You have 30 seconds.
First of all, what has changed in Bernie's world is he now wants to be a Republican candidate for U.S. Senate. He's running in a primary, so he's willing to abandon long-held principled beliefs. That should scare all of us. I went to the border. I went to the Arizona border, and I saw where the drugs come over. These folks come over in huge backpacks of drugs in the middle of the night. They're willing to send 20 people over and lose 3. And 17 of these big packages get through the country. We need to also talk to China. China is where Mexican cartels are using the fentanyl product to create these weapons of mass destruction. If 70,000 people were killed by a bomb, don't you think we would go and fix that?
All right. Thank you, Mr. Dolan. Mr. LaRose, a follow-up for you, something you touched on earlier. There's an ad supporting your campaign that says you want to, quote, kill the cartels. Do you agree with some prominent Republicans that could mean military intervention, including drone strikes in Mexico? 30 seconds.
100%. The definition of a foreign terrorist organization is a group that's willing to kill our fellow Americans. These cartels are killing over 200 Americans a day with the fentanyl that they're bringing into this country. We know that this comes from China, mixed together in Mexico. We must define these cartels as foreign terrorist organizations and use the full force of the U.S. military and the U.S. federal government to kill them so that they can't kill our fellow Americans.
We do want to button up this topic on immigration. We have another question here, a follow-up that's going to be 30 seconds. Each of you are going to have a chance to respond. We're going to start with Mr. Marino. Do you think the United States should end birthright citizenship? 30 seconds.
Absolutely. I do. That's easy. So let me just address what Frank just said. That's very irresponsible rhetoric. We have to work with Mexico to give Mexico the option. They can be our largest legal trading partner or our largest illegal trading partner. They can't be both. But if we have that kind of rhetoric, that neocon rhetoric, Mexico will elect a very anti-American president. We're going to work with Mexico to make certain that they understand it's in their best interest to have us help them wipe out the drug cartels. When we start acting like the ugly American going into Mexico, telling them we're going to indiscriminately bomb you, we're going to lose all credibility with what needs to be our partner in wiping out the drug cartels.
Thank you, Mr. Marino. Mr. LaRose, we're going to come back around to you right after this, but Mr. Dolan, 30
So
seconds on this question.
the answer certainly is yes. It's interesting that, Bernie, you also called out for the destruction from the face of the earth of these cartels. So that's an irresponsible statement. Look, we have got to not just work with the Mexican government. I would push the administration to go to Mexico City and say, you know that aid we provide, you know that trade we're involved with, that's going to end if you don't join forces with us and defeat and eradicate the Mexican cartels, because they're controlling your country and they're killing us in our country. It has to end.
So when you say eradicate them, you mean wipe them off the face of the earth. It's the same thing. But of course,
Bernie,
don't read
you just said that Frank was being irresponsible. You need to work with the Mexican government. You need to be tough with the Mexican government. These political statements that you say, and then you realize they don't hit. You backtrack.
Stop.
This is about trusting us. You can't
Matt,
trust
you're
Bernie.
reading,
We
you're
backtrack on
reading,
everything.
you're reading a plain dealer a little too much. All right, what I said is exactly what I believe, which is we're going to work with them, and then we will, with Mexico, wipe the drug cartels off the face of the earth, just like what we did in Colombia.
Only because
that
that's
destroyed
what
the
I've
country.
been
Thank you,
talking
Candace.
about.
We
You
want
know,
to bring
actions
Mr. LaRose
working.
in on this as well. Mr. LaRose, first the idea of birthright citizenship, and I know you want to respond to the other candidates.
Yeah, first of all, birthright citizenship is a bad idea, and nobody that comes into this country illegally should be able to take advantage of that. Let me be clear to families all over Ohio that have lost loved ones from fentanyl. I am willing to use lethal force to protect your families. And that means, of course, we'll work with the Mexican government, jump on board with us. Mexico's had an opportunity for a long time, and because of corruption and other problems, has been unwilling or maybe even unable to do anything about these criminal cartels that control large swaths of that country. If they won't fix it, we will, and stop the poison from coming into this country.
Okay, thank you, candidates. Colleen.
We're going to move on now, candidates. This is a Republican debate, and it is also a presidential election year. So if you win, the top of the ticket will be the Republican nominee for president. Right now, of course, the front runner is former President Donald Trump. Trump has won twice in Ohio by an overwhelming majority. He has endorsed Bernie Marino in this race. And Mr. Marino, we're going to get to you on this in a minute. But we're going to begin with Mr. Dolan. You are the only candidate who has said you were not campaigning for the Trump endorsement. You have a minute. Tell us why not.
Because I'm about Ohio, and I'm about enacting Trump policies. Look, I'm going to support the Republican nominee. We have got to have Joe Biden go. His agenda is hurting Ohio, and it's hurting our country. But the reality is I'm the only one on this stage who's enacted Trump policies. These two have spent a great deal of time deleting all their past comments, hateful comments on Trump, and now, again, because it's in their political best interest, they're now saying something completely different. Reality is I've gone around the state of Ohio, and I listen to Ohio Republicans. They know I have a conservative agenda that will make a difference in Ohio and will make a difference in Washington. They also know they don't necessarily agree with me on everything, but they know I've been honest with them. They know that I will fight for Ohio. And they also know the only thing you can trust about my two opponents is that when the political winds change, they will change with it. I will not. I will always do what's best for Ohio and America, not my political future.
Thank you, Mr. Dolan. Mr. LaRose, you would have welcomed a Trump endorsement. In fact, you told me in an interview that Donald Trump said he was most likely not going to make any kind of an endorsement in the Ohio Senate race. The very next day, he endorsed your opponent. What happened? 1 minute.
What matters is action. What matters is a proven record. What we need is a senator who's going to stand with President Trump. I've proven that that's exactly who I am because we have a country to save. I believe Donald Trump will be in the White House in 2025. I was proud to endorse him. At the time, I said, you want somebody leading the charge, whether it's a military organization or the country, who is both feared and fearless. That's Donald Trump, and that's why I stand with him on the policies that are going to save this country. And that means securing the border. That means restoring an economy that doesn't hurt Ohio families like the current Brown and Biden economy does. And that means restoring parents' rights so that parents are actively involved in the lives of their children, not some faraway bureaucrat. That's what it's going to take to save this country. I sincerely believe it's not exaggeration at this point to say we have a country to save. I will be an ally of President Trump in the United States Senate to get his appointments done and to get his policies done.
Thank you very much, Mr. LaRose. Mr. Marino, Donald Trump did endorse you. And that endorsement brings with it everything that Donald Trump brings to the table. So will you still welcome that endorsement if he is convicted of a felony? 1 minute.
Well, first of all those charges are completely trumped up election interference. They're completely illegitimate. These are insane judges. We have a country right now where the current president is using the justice system against his top opponent. And the reality is he did endorse me. He knows who Frank LaRose is and doesn't think that Frank will have his back and understands that dynamic. And I think it's extremely horrific that Frank would have lied and said that President Trump told him something that he obviously did not tell him. And in terms of Matt says he goes all over Ohio. He hasn't shown up to 7 of the 9 endorsement meetings in Southeast or Southwest Ohio. Doesn't even bother to ask for their endorsement. So when he says Ohio matters in his little bubble up here. And in terms of his policies, you'll hear Matt say, I support President Trump's policies. It's just the rhetoric. That's how he gets these pathological anti-Trumpers to support his campaign. The reality is he does not support President Trump's policies. President Trump is aligned with me. We have to deport illegal immigrants. We have to make certain that we don't fund another endless war. It's policies where Matt Dolan is consistent. I'll give him that. Consistently wrong.
Mr. Marino, you have said some things about both of these men, and I'm going to give each of them 15 seconds to respond. He's called you out for not seeking endorsements. How do you respond to that? 15 seconds.
First of all, I'm the only one in this stage that has cut taxes like Trump. I have reduced regulations like Trump. I have helped small business like Trump. I have given parents choice, universal school choice, so they decide where their children. Bernie, I am not going to sit here and lecture you. You don't even understand what we've been able to accomplish in Ohio mirrors what Trump was able to do in Washington. Give me the chance and we'll do the same.
Thank you, Mr. Dolan.
So he didn't seek those endorsements. That was your question, though. He didn't seek those endorsements.
I'm building a campaign to beat Sherrod Brown. I have county captains in all 88 counties. We have most money at hand. We have the most elected official endorsements in the state of Ohio. My fight is about Ohio. I will always fight for Ohio.
Thank you. And I'm going to go back to you, Mr. LaRose, for 15 seconds. He essentially called you a liar for saying that the president promised not to endorse in this case. Settle it once and for all. Are you lying about that?
Of course not. In fact, my honor is something I value above almost all else. What Ohioans don't care about is a bunch of bickering from a couple of corporate elitists. What they do care about is solutions from a battle-tested conservative who's going to fight for their values and save our country. That's who I am, and that's exactly what I'll do.
Thank you, Mr. LaRose.
So you just called President Trump a liar, just to be clear.
Candidates, we are going to move on here. We're going to talk about the economy. Everyone is noticing inflation at the grocery store. There's been a double-digit increase in food prices in the past 2 years. But the Joe Biden White House says the U.S. economy is strong. 2023 ended with low unemployment, significantly lower inflation, and just today the stock market closed at record highs. The question, based on these seeming opposing factors, where do you see the economy today? What would you do to guarantee growth? Mr. LaRose, we're starting with you. You have 1 minute here.
Yeah, this is one where I live in the real economy, just like everyday Ohioans do. I'm not sure that my opponents here have to sit at the kitchen table and figure out how they're going to pay their bills the way most Ohioans do. I understand that it's because of the bad policies of Biden and Brown that Ohio families are suffering. They've offered solutions that aren't really solutions at all, hiring 80,000 new IRS agents and spending trillions of dollars on green energy nonsense, but calling it somehow an Inflation Reduction Act. That doesn't reduce inflation. The way that we grow this economy is by getting government out of the way, cutting taxes, streamlining regulations. That means making the Trump tax cuts permanent in 2025, and that means doing oil and gas exploration here in Ohio so that we can not just be energy independent, but energy dominant. That's how we grow our economy.
Mr. LaRose, thank you. Mr. Marino, you're up here. 60 seconds on this idea of growing the economy while the Biden White House says the economy is strong, these indicators.
Yeah, I won't touch on the fact that he has $250,000 in cash lying around to put into a failing campaign, and according to his disclosure, has between $500,000 and $1 million in cash.
False.
I don't think that's like every Ohioan. If you think that's false, look it up on his financial disclosure. The way we solve this economy is we have to stop sending career politicians and lawyers to Washington, D.C. that have actually never done it. They have no idea how to create jobs because they've never actually done it. The problem we have in D.C. is a personnel problem. We have mediocre lawyers and career politicians who only think of one thing and one thing only, which is their next election. At the end of the day, the way we fix this is we unleash the private sector, we cut burdensome regulations, we cut taxes, we give companies incentives to grow and build here in America. We get people into the workforce. We have way too many people sitting on the sidelines that can work and are incentivized not to work. And we have an assault on American energy. Energy goes into everything, whether it's diesel that goes into trucks, this move to electric cars. That's how we solve this problem.
Thank you, Mr. Marino. Mr. LaRose, take 30 seconds here. You can respond. You were called out about this money to your campaign.
This is the silly stuff. But listen, you can look at our financial reports. I'm not in the same league as these guys are. Lauren and I are raising our 3 children in a small middle-class house in Columbus, and we live the way that Ohioans live, and we appreciate what it takes to try to raise a family within this economy that's hurting families. Again, this is not something that either of my opponents can say that they really have that appreciation for how real Ohioans live.
Thanks, Mr. LaRose. Mr. Dolan, you're up next on this. The strong economic indicator, jobs, stock market versus high prices that Americans are paying. You have 60 seconds.
Look, I think people feel it. They know that things cost 17% more than when Biden came into the White House. Look, what you need is someone like me who's actually done it. I'm the only one with private and public sector experience. So I know how to create jobs. I know how to balance a budget. I know how to do it in the public sector. I've balanced 4 budgets. My budgets are routinely called the most conservative budgets in state history. That's not me talking. That's conservative groups around the country, around the state saying it. And every Republican joined me in that effort. We did cut taxes. We did reduce regulations. We did not spend more revenues than we brought in. We have the most money in a rainy day fund, and Ohio has the highest bond rating you can get. Isn't that what we want in Washington? And when we strategically spend, we spend for Ohioans. And I am proud to say that we took on the woke agenda. And in Ohio, because of my efforts, we now have invested in universal school choice for all parents. And we had to clean up the mess that Frank LaRose created when he could have stopped Obama's Common Core. But when he was a state senator, he rolled over, and we had to deal with Common Core, the gateway to the woke agenda in our schools.
While we are focusing on economy, going to have another question that will go to all 3 of you. Because Congress cannot agree on a budget, it just passed a continuing resolution to keep government going until March. Will you support the use of continuing resolutions to keep government running? Mr. LaRose, we begin with you. You have 30 seconds.
I think an oath is an important thing, and the oath that I'm going to take to serve in the United States Senate means first and foremost protecting this country. And so if the Democrats are unwilling to join us on border security, if they're unwilling to get the out-of-control spending under control, you bet I'm willing to shut down the government. This isn't something that we should relish, by the way. It's not a good thing to shut down the government. But when it comes to protecting this country, saving this country, absolutely a tool we have to be willing to use.
Thank you, Mr. LaRose. Mr. Marino, where do you stand on continuing resolutions?
You would never run a business that way. The idea that we keep kicking the can down the road, $34 trillion in debt, absolutely not. The reality is Republicans need to go into a negotiation with nothing off the table. We obviously don't want to shut down the government, but that would not be something you take off the table because it lessens your ability to negotiate. But I'll just say one thing real quick about what Matt just said earlier. I'm going to look at the people of Ohio and ask you a question. If you think your taxes are too low in Ohio, then maybe you should take a look at Matt. If you think your taxes are too high in Ohio, because of career politicians that continue to, quote, invest our money, then take a look at my campaign.
Thank you. We are turning to you now, Mr. Dolan. Where do you stand on this issue of continuing resolutions? You have 30 seconds.
Well, first of all, I encourage you all to look at all the efforts I've done to cut taxes in Ohio. Tens of billions of dollars have gone back to Ohioans since I've been appointed by conservative speakers and conservative presidents and joined by all Republicans to bring a balanced budget. So no, I wouldn't use CRs. Send me. We know how to balance a budget. We don't have a revenue problem. We have a spending problem. You do not spend more than your revenues, and you have to be willing to make difficult choices. And I have a career where I have made difficult choices. They always haven't been the best political choice for me, but they've always been the best for Ohio.
Thank you, Mr. Dolan. We do have another follow-up on this topic. We're going back to Mr. LaRose here. You told Colleen in an interview that as Secretary of State, your office has handled a record number of filings in Ohio to start new businesses here. But at the same time, your website calls the economy a disaster. Explain that difference. You have 30 seconds.
Yeah, listen, Joe, Ohioans are doing what they always do, and they're overcoming adversity with entrepreneurship and creativity and starting a record number of new businesses here in the Buckeye State. But the headwinds from Washington are making that more difficult. Because of the out-of-control spending of the Biden administration, we have inflation through the roof. We have interest rates through the roof. That's hurting Ohio employers. Ohio employers are having a hard time finding employees as well because of the policies of this administration. So yeah, Ohioans are starting new companies, but they're not having the kind of support from Washington that they should have.
Thank you, Mr. LaRose. Mr. Marino, we're on to you. While we're on this topic of the economy, some questions about your private sector experience have come to light this week. Your campaign website touts a campaign running to support American workers, but some of your former workers have sued you over things like gender and age discrimination, and as well as not paying overtime. You settled many of those suits out of court. Many of those accusers now support your campaign. We want to give you the opportunity here to address some of the allegations in that suit. You have 30 seconds.
Yeah, read the article. I mean, 2 of the 3 people that mentioned me in the case here in Ohio are both supporting my campaign. We're great friends. They're great people. Sorry that they got dragged into a political campaign. In terms of the overtime situation in Massachusetts, those were extremist Harvard elite judges that changed the law in Massachusetts retroactively. It affected every single business in Massachusetts. Had nothing to do with me. But to my friends in Boston and in Massachusetts, leave there before it's too late. Come to Ohio, where we have a good judicial system, we have a good business environment, because Massachusetts, New York, and California are becoming hellholes.
Thank you, Mr. Marino. Mr. Dolan, you're up next here. You're the finance chair in the Ohio Senate. You're running a campaign you say is about fiscal restraint, which oftentimes that means dealing with entitlements. Presidential candidate Nikki Haley made news saying people in their 20s should expect their retirement age to be raised come retirement. What, if anything, would you do to address programs like Medicare and Social Security at the federal government? You have 30 seconds.
First thing, let me be very clear. If you are receiving benefits or if you are receiving money that you put in, you will not lose those. But we have a responsibility to future generations to get into a room and work hard, because you would never say to a business, if you know something's going to be insolvent in 10 years, let's keep doing the same thing. You know, my opponents want to scare me. They want to scare you and say, oh, this guy's going to do this for other reasons. Here's the reality. If anyone like Sherrod Brown or Bernie Moreno or Frank LaRose tries to scare you about what's going to happen in Washington based on what I'm going to do, ask them, what are you going to do for my children? What are you going to do for my grandchildren?
Thank you, Mr. Dolan. Colleen?
Candidates, we now want to turn to the topic of abortion. All 7 states that voted on abortion access voted to protect it, and that includes Ohio by a margin of 13 points. You have all said you would support a federal abortion ban. Could you each tell us what that ban would include? And please be specific. Mr. Marino, we start with you, 60 seconds.
Well, Colleen, to be clear, you're using that word, I'm not. What I'm saying is that we have to have policies that make it less expensive for moms to have a baby, less expensive to raise kids. We have to make certain that we have women that have access to health care, have access to birth control and contraception. And that the reality is Dobbs made this predominantly a state issue, but in as so much as there is a federal role, I think we can work towards consensus around not having federal funding for abortion and getting to a point where we can have a 15-week floor where there's common sense restrictions after 15 weeks. The reality is the left has gotten so radical, so extreme on abortion, that they believe abortion should be allowed way past the moment of viability, well into 25, 30, 35 weeks. They are the absolute extremists on abortion. Sherrod Brown used to have that position. That's how far left he's gone. And he even voted against the Infant Born Alive Protection Act that says in a botched abortion, that baby should die on a cold metal table. I don't think that's where the hearts and minds of Ohioans are.
A quick follow-up to you, 30 seconds. Why is this now a federal issue? It was returned to the states. Why should it be a federal issue? 30 seconds.
Because it puts us in line with even the most left-leaning European countries that have a 15-week or even some cases 12-week floor. The U.S. is the outlier. We're the only ones that even conceive of having an abortion in week 25 and 30 and 35. Now, Sherrod Brown is probably sitting at home going, I'm not advocating for that. Then join us and let's get consensus around this issue. Let's move beyond this incredibly divisive issue and get to a place where we mirror even, again, left-leaning countries in Europe.
Mr. Dolan, we move on to you. Please be specific. How do you envision a possible federal abortion ban?
First, we have to understand this is a difficult issue for everyone. I am pro-life. I'm proud of my pro-life record. We must treat all life equally. So when we don't do that, we're not being true to our Constitution. My pro-life record has reduced abortions in Ohio by 37%. We have record funding in the pregnancy and crisis centers so women have an opportunity to have health care during their pregnancy. We've revamped our adoption program. A pro-life record that supports life, a pro-life record that can beat Sherrod Brown. My concern is the disingenuousness of my opponents who have been all over the place on this issue. We'll put Sherrod Brown back in the Senate for 6 more years. But because of Sherrod Brown, because of the liberal outside groups, we have an extremely liberal, terrible abortion policy here in Ohio. If that starts becoming the norm, then I do think we have to step up at the federal level, and I would support if the 3 exceptions in 15 weeks.
And again, give you 30 seconds to tell us, why do you think this is now a federal issue? The Supreme Court returned it to the states. Why should the federal government intervene? 30 seconds.
Yeah, I don't want it to be a federal issue, but I don't want late-term abortions to be the norm in the United States of America, because that is out of touch. I think in a large part is because of what, we haven't listened. We haven't listened. And I think it's important that we understand that coming to a common sense solution to this requires people not to take the extreme positions because of political expediency. We had a chance. We should have done it. We didn't. But now I can't sit back and let late-term abortion be the norm throughout this country. That is out of step with who we are as a country.
Thank you, Mr. Dolan. Mr. LaRose, same question. We're going to give you 60 seconds. Be specific about a federal abortion ban you would support.
Again, I don't use the word ban, but I've been very clear and consistent when it comes to this. Ohioans know that I fight for the sanctity of life. That's not something that's going to change. We also have to be really thoughtful and compassionate about this issue. We have to understand that any woman who's facing an unplanned pregnancy is, by definition, facing a crisis in her life. And so it's not enough to be pro-birth. We have to truly be pro-life, and that means supportive services for those mothers that make the courageous decision to maybe be a single mother or raise a child, to maybe bring a child into the world to give that child up for adoption. We need to make sure that there's supports available for them. But when it comes to federal standards, listen, the states can set their own standards, but there should be a bare minimum that we look at the federal level. And we're not a nation that should allow late-term abortion. That's the extreme position that Biden and Brown have. We're not a country that should allow a minor child to be hustled off to a Planned Parenthood facility without her parents knowing. That's the position, the extremist position that Brown and Biden have. That's not consistent with our values as Ohioans or as Americans.
Mr. LaRose, a follow-up for you as well. You were certainly at the center of the abortion issue as Secretary of State this past year. There were 2 statewide campaigns you were involved in, again, state campaigns. 30 seconds, why is this now a federal issue?
Well, it's a federal issue specifically because in states like Ohio, we now have one of the most extreme abortion laws in the country. And listen, I'm always going to fight for a worthwhile cause. Thank God when I was on the battlefield, I never looked to my left and right and saw myself standing out there on the battlefield alone. But it often felt like that last summer, where I was one of the only ones that was out there consistently fighting for this issue because it matters to Ohioans.
Hey,
All
let's
right, thank
be
you, Mr.
clear.
LaRose.
Let's be clear.
We'll give you 15 seconds, Mr. Dolan.
Let's be clear about what Frank did. Frank went around the state and talked to Republicans who already agreed with him to prepare him for this U.S. Senate race. Frank, you should have been doing what my team was doing, going door to door, talking to undecided voters to explain to them how egregious this abortion amendment was.
All right, thank you, Mr. Dolan. Moving on, Joe.
Okay, candidates, we want to move on to some specific questions that we have for each of you. A reminder, there's no rebuttals in this section. We begin with Mr. Dolan here. Your campaign website vows to protect the Second Amendment. However, during your time in the state Senate, you proposed a red flag law. You voted against the expansion of Stand Your Ground, as well as against lowering the training requirements for the arming of school employees. Do you worry, are you out of step with Ohio Republicans on the issue of guns? You have 60 seconds.
No. I support the Second Amendment. I have a strong Second Amendment record. I supported Castle Doctrine. I supported constitutional carry. I supported concealed carry. You know, you call it red flag. The reality is I have the guts to stand up and say, if you are a legal owner, a sportsman, you have nothing to fear from me to your Second Amendment rights. But if you own a gun illegally and use it, or if you're showing suicidal or homicidal tendencies, don't you think it's time that we step up and prevent this violent crime? Again, I'm not going to Washington to take any guns away, but look at what happened today. Attorney General Dave Yost, a Republican, joined and said, look, we've got to do something to stop gun violence, and he hired a prosecutor to do that. We all say when these tragedies occur, we got to do mental health. I've done mental health. We're now going to have 6 regional health crises around the state to be proactive. This is what it's about. We want to protect law-abiding citizens to enjoy the Second Amendment right to self-defense. But we have got to recognize that illegals are using these guns to kill people, and that suicidal or homicidal people need to get help before they do more tragedies.
Thank you, Mr. Dolan. Mr. LaRose, this question is for you. Ohio's only Republican senator, J.D. Vance, has endorsed your opponent, Mr. Marino. And he tweeted earlier this month questions about your character, calling you a career politician who will, quote, lie through his teeth to get power. What's your response to the senator who you would have to work with if you are elected? You have 1 minute.
This is the kind of rhetoric you get on the campaign trail, unfortunately. Listen, I've worked well with Senator Vance. I will continue to work well with Senator Vance. I was the first statewide office holder in Ohio to endorse him. I want to pivot back to this gun issue, though, because really, this is one of these issues that we need to be clear about. The Second Amendment is under attack, not just here in Ohio, but nationally. There's only one of us up here who has a consistent record of fighting to protect our Second Amendment values. That means we don't disarm law-abiding people. We don't disarm Americans in order to try to make the community safer. We need to support our gun rights. The Second Amendment's very clear when it says shall not be infringed.
Thank you so much.
Mr. Marino, you're up next here. You made headlines last year during a campaign event when you referred to the Civil War, and you said, quote, where are the reparations for the people for the North who died to save the lives of black people? What did you mean by that? You have 60 seconds.
Sure, I was poking fun at the race-baiting media, the liberal media that loves to instigate a warfare. For example, my family's from South America. I don't view myself as a victim, but yet the media and the liberal elites want minorities to live through this idea that they're somehow victims, this culture of low expectations. Obviously, that was not any kind of policy proposal, but of course the media, in truest form, by the way, if you've read the rest of that clip, I actually said the media predicted they would do exactly what they did because they love that. They love bombastic headlines that get clickbait. The reality is we have to move forward as a nation. We have to stop going back into our history and judging our history by our current view of the world. This is a great and amazing country with not a perfect history, but a history that we should all be incredibly proud of, the fact that we've evolved in an incredible way unlike any other nation on earth, and we have to stop dividing ourselves by race. Critically important.
Thank you, candidates. Colleen.
We're going to move on now, gentlemen, to foreign policy. You've all expressed strong support for Israel, but you seem to be divided on the subject of Ukraine. How do you view these two fights when it comes to America's commitment and involvement? This question is for all of you, but we begin with Mr. LaRose. You have 60 seconds.
Well, first of all, when I, again, take that oath to serve in the United States Senate, my first obligation is to protect the security of this country. And that's why I've been very clear that not another penny will go to Ukraine until we've secured the southern border. That has to be the top priority. And once we do that, of course, the world's most exceptional nation can do things to make sure that our world is safer and, more importantly, that America is more secure. And that means that we need to create the circumstances where the fight in Ukraine can end very rapidly. When it comes to Israel, there is nobody more pro-Israeli than I am. In fact, I've trained with members of the Israeli Defense Forces. I've been there 5 times. I've made it very clear that we will stand with our ally Israel. It's right there in the book of Genesis. I'll bless those who bless thee and curse those who curse thee. But it also makes great sense economically, diplomatically. I was shocked when my opponent, Mr. Moreno, said that Israel doesn't need America's help. I guess you should expect that from a guy that sat on a board of a foundation that gave money to anti-Israel groups like J Street and even a radical pro-Palestinian organization.
Thank you. And we are going now to you, Mr. Moreno. You'll have a chance to address that because we want to know where you stand on American support for Israel and Ukraine. 60 seconds.
I'm going to channel my friend J.D. Vance's words. This guy would just lie through his teeth to get political power. I have no idea what the heck he's talking about. The reality is this.
The receipts.
I've been endorsed by Norm Coleman, Senator Norm Coleman, who's the chairman of the Republican Jewish Coalition. I've been endorsed by Lee Zeldin, who's the vice chair. I've been to Israel and invested in technology companies. Frank, my granddaughter is Jewish. The fact that you would say something like that is disgusting, but it's keeping with his brand. This guy will do anything to achieve political power.
Look at the facts.
That's exactly what's wrong with Washington. And the reality is Matt's a bundler. He wants to bundle these things together. Israel, that situation has nothing to do with Ukraine. We have to stop funding endless wars. We have been at this for 2 years. We've given Ukraine almost well north of $100 billion. And what's happened? Russia's gotten stronger, Russia's gotten wealthier, and nothing has happened in that war. As the leader of the world, what we need to do is drive towards peace and end the killing in Ukraine. That's what we should be driving towards, and not giving one more cent to Joe Biden.
Thank you very much.
Is what he's
we'll be
calling
back
for.
to you, Mr. LaRose, but we're going to go now to Mr. Dolan. Israel and Ukraine. How do you view the American role in those two conflicts? 60 seconds.
Sure. I represent a large Ukrainian population. And this isn't a balance sheet war for them. This is real. Their country's been invaded. And you know what else they know? They have affinity with our country because we've been invaded at the southern border. And the incompetence of Joe Biden is making them both worse. But we cannot take our eye off the ball. Here's what it means. If the United States does not continue to provide ammunition, weaponry, and aid to Ukraine, then Ohio boys and girls will be fighting Russia in Poland, Western Europe, or the Baltics. That is the result of both of their policies. That cannot happen. As to Israel, I have been strong with Israel. I have said that if I go to the U.S. Senate, United States will always be with Israel. And at home, I will not tolerate, accept this growing normalization that these anti-Semitic remarks are somehow normal. Not only do we have to stand for Israel and their absolute right to defeat Hamas, but we have to be examples in this country that we stand for Israel's and American Jews, and we are allies with no daylight between us.
Thank you, Mr. Dolan. We're going to circle back around on this with a few follow-ups. Back to you, Mr. LaRose. You've accused Bernie Moreno of waving the white flag of surrender in Ukraine. So tell us what you meant by that. 30 seconds.
I can tell you from experience, you can end any war tomorrow by simply surrendering. Of course, that's not what we as Americans do. What a contrast we have up here. My two opponents, one seems to want to fund an endless war in Ukraine. The other wants to just wave the white flag and say, hey, not our problem. Listen, when you're the largest, most exceptional nation on the planet, you don't just hide on your continent and pretend it's not our problem. There are smart things that we can do to bring this to an expedient end.
All right, we're going to move on now to you, Mr. Moreno. 30 seconds. Your fellow candidates did take issue with you saying Israel doesn't need America's help or more money. The Dolan campaign said that amounts to being fringe and isolationist. You have 30 seconds to respond.
Well, let's go back to the Ukraine thing. You asked earlier why President Trump endorsed me and not my opponents. My position on Ukraine is exactly what President Trump's position is. It's not surrender. It's not waving the white flag of surrender. It's exactly President Trump's position, Frank, and that's probably why he didn't endorse you. In terms of Israel, this was a week after October 7th, and what I was responding to is exactly what Bibi was saying, which is give us the space to conduct the war we think we need to conduct. At that moment in time, 1 week after October 7th, that's exactly what the U.S. should have been doing. Instead, we were telling them how to fight. They were calling for a ceasefire while Israelis were getting murdered. I also then called and said we have to expedite the weaponry and we have to end the anti-Semitism movement. That was October 14th. I would have Matt, who's a state senator, this is really important, is a state senator, call on the boards of trustees at Ohio universities and fire the Palestinian terrorist sympathizing professors. Will you do that?
All right, we're going to move on to Mr. Dolan now because we do have a follow-up question for you. 2 years ago, you were on this very stage also professing your support for Ukraine, as you're doing tonight. The U.S. has already spent $75 billion there. How much money do you think the U.S. should spend? 30 seconds.
First of all, let me answer.
Of course.
We have taken on higher ed. Jerry Serino has led a charge, and we are taking on higher ed. It's way more than just Ohio University, Bernie. It is a problem throughout Ohio. Look, a lot of those dollars, about 60% of the dollars go to 38 states in the United States of America. We're building up our own weaponry and then shipping the weapons over to them. We cannot allow Putin to remain in Ukraine. It will be a national security threat. Donald Trump knew that. That's why he gave weapons to Ukraine. That's why he didn't attack while he was in office, because he understood if it did happen, it would be a threat. We have to deal with it.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Dolan. Joe?
Okay, candidates, another issue, another area where you appear to have differentiated yourself on this campaign trail. It's your position on January 6th. Just this week, again, it's become an issue on the campaign trail. We're going to start with Mr. Marino on this. In a pair of tweets on January 6th, 2021, on the day of the event, you referred to the rioters as, quote, criminals and morons. It appears you've shifted your position towards January 6th participants. At an Ohio news forum later that year, you called them political prisoners. Is that still your position, and why is that change important to Republican voters? You have 60 seconds here.
Well, you're twisting that up, Joe, with all due respect. The people who committed crimes on January 6th are criminals. The people who broke windows, who damaged personal property are criminals. And they should be punished the way criminals who do that are getting punished. The problem we have is that we have people there who are being held in solitary confinement. They've not had any ability to have lawyers. They've been stripped of their due process. These are moms, these are grandmothers that were wandering the Capitol. Now, were they trespassing? Sure. But we treat trespassers in a certain way. And you contrast that with the way that our government has treated the people who burnt our cities down. The people who burnt the McDonald's, or I think it was a Wendy's in Atlanta, got a $500 fine. The people who walked peacefully inside the Capitol are still in jail. That is insane. This two-tier justice system has to end. This cannot be allowed in America. So it is absolutely a consistent position that I had. The people who committed crimes should be punished. The people in accordance with the way others who do those crimes are punished.
Thank you, Mr. Marino. Mr. Dolan, we're going to move on to you. You sent out a news release earlier this month marking the anniversary of January 6th. In part, you said, quote, efforts to rewrite or minimize the events of January 6th mean we're destined to repeat them. We cannot allow that to happen. Violence is never acceptable. You went on to say, quote, you have no business serving in the U.S. Senate if you disrespect those sworn to protect it, end quote. What should Republican voters know about your position compared to the other two candidates on this stage? You have 1 minute.
Well, we just heard an absolute political phony answer. He's trying to reinvent himself. You know what January 6th really is about? It's about trust. January 6th was a bad day, and I said it then. January 6th is a bad day, and I'm saying it now. Public service jobs are about trust, making sure that you're going to follow through in what you do. You know, we had Frank calling election integrity issues only the far right. Now he's out there saying there's problems with this election. You know, you just heard Bernie calling them morons, unstable. Now he's doing political twisting. This is about trust. And Bernie, we learned this week, I don't know if we can trust you. You know, your employees trusted you to follow a court order and do not destroy documents that help them, their case against you. But what did you do? You shredded those documents because it helped Bernie Moreno, not the employees. This is a matter of trust. What do we believe in? What are we going to get done? And consistency. And I have been a conservative who has been consistent, and I've gotten things done.
Thank you. Mr. Moreno, take some time to respond, then we do want to bring Mr. LaRose
Yeah, I
in
mean,
as
if
well.
you want Liz Cheney to represent you in the United States Senate from Ohio, here's your choice. Because that's where his position comes from. The reality is, Matt, it's sad to see you repeating left-wing liberal talking points. The reality
You
is
got
those cases...
sanctioned by a judge.
Please don't interrupt me. The reality is the judge is a Harvard elitist lunatic. By the way, compare my lawsuits to the number of lawsuits that the Cleveland Indians have had, but maybe your dad can explain to you how business works.
Mr. Dolan, I'm going to give you 10 seconds to respond to this.
I didn't mention a thing about his lawsuits. It's about trust. And you Republican out there, you want to trust Bernie? His employees, all Bernie had to do was just maintain some documents. And the judge even had to go out and sanctioned him for shredding it. And he said, we can't just take Bernie Moreno's words when there's documents that could say otherwise.
Thank you, Mr.
That's
Dolan.
what we're facing.
We're going to move in.
But Joe, again, he's impugning my integrity. Read the documents. The underlying data was not destroyed. This is a report that was produced.
Okay,
Matt
we
knows
are
that
gonna
because
move on.
he's a
We're gonna move on to Mr.
here's what's
LaRose
crazy.
here.
He's a lawyer who should know better, but that's what third place looks like.
Thank you, Mr. Moreno. Mr. LaRose, we want to bring you in on this. On January 6th, that is the topic we're discussing here, you called the riot at the Capitol, quote, a flagrant disregard for the law and, quote, un-American. Please share with the voters tonight where you stand on those who participated on January 6th today. You have 1 minute.
Well, consistent with what I said then, those who trashed the building, broke windows, harmed Capitol police officers should face justice for it. That is an un-American style of behavior. But what is also happening is that a lot of people that didn't engage in violence, simply walked through the building or what have you, are now essentially political prisoners because it fits a certain left-wing ideology to weaponize the federal government to go after their political opponents. Within 6 months of that same incident in Washington, major American cities were burned, and there were virtually no consequences for it. And so we need to be consistent about the application of law. If you broke the law, if you hurt people, if you damaged property, of course you should pay the penalty for that. For those that didn't, they should be let out of jail, and really immediately.
All right. Thank you, candidates. Colleen.
We're going to move on now, gentlemen, to the next topic. The Ohio legislature recently passed a bill banning medical care, gender-affirming care, and restricting transgender women and girls from participating in sports. This has been a big focus here in Ohio. So we're going to ask you whether it should be addressed on the federal level. But Mr. Dolan, we're going to begin with you, and hopefully in 15 seconds you can tell us. This is very timely for you. You are a state senator. In 2 days you will be voting whether or not to override Governor DeWine's veto on this bill. How will you be voting? Can you tell us that first?
Sure, I'm going to vote. I voted for the bill, and I'm going to vote to override. 2 years ago, I stood up here and said biological men should not be playing sports against women. And we're going to take care of that this week. And we're going to make sure that we protect children from irreversible behavior, from irreversible medicine.
Well, then let me ask you the main question for 30 seconds,
Sure.
please. Should this be addressed on the federal level?
No. The 10th Amendment makes it clear. The issues that are not expressly stated in the Constitution are left to the states. And in Ohio, we want to protect our children. We want to protect women's sports. Look at the other things that I was able to do. We no longer have critical race theory. We no longer have ESG funding in states. Because I just don't beat my chest and go out and make people mad. I go out and solve the problems. We can do that here in Ohio. The United States, the federal government should not be interfering with state governments.
All right, thank you, Mr. Dolan. Mr. LaRose, the same question. Is this a federal issue, transgender rights?
Listen, there's a radical gender ideology that's gripped college campuses in East and West Coast states, and unfortunately, it's now coming to Ohio. The governor made a very bad decision. Thankfully, the state legislature is overriding it. Let me be clear about something. Anyone who would subject a minor child, a precious child, to a gender transition, that's child abuse. And my girls They could beat the boys on the basketball court, but they shouldn't have to. The only way for women's sports to be safe and fair are for girls to compete against girls and boys to compete against boys.
Thank you, Mr. LaRose. Mr. Marino, same question, 30 seconds. Where do you stand on the transgender legislation at the federal level?
It's almost like we're living in a simulation. I think we have a Republican governor that vetoed that bill. It's insane. The reality is there is a federal role. It's called Title IX. We have to protect women's sports. Women worked a long time to make sure that they had sports. The fact that you get men to go in there and compete in women's sports is insane. And I do agree that in terms of mutilating children and giving them experimental hormones, those things are regulated by the FDA, and we should ban those kinds of drugs for children. Absolutely.
Thank you, Mr. Marino, and thank you to all three of you for tonight.
Yeah, well, now we're going to give you each 30 seconds for a closing statement. Mr. LaRose, we are going to start with you.
It's not exaggeration at this point to say that we have a country to save. What I'm asking you to do is consider me in this job interview because I'm the battle-tested conservative. We've got enough corporate elites in Washington. What we don't have is any Green Berets. And I would be the first Green Beret to serve in the United States Senate. Well, I will go there to fight to secure the border, fight for parents' rights, and to put this economy back on track. My name's Frank LaRose. Visit franklarose.com for more information. I'm asking for your votes and I'm asking for your prayers.
Mr. Dolan, 30 seconds for your closing statement.
Thank you. Thank you for hosting. Look, I hope you know that I work each and every day to make Ohioans' lives better. I focus on what makes your life better. I don't focus on my political career. But here's what this is about. Sherrod Brown has been in the U.S. Senate for 18 years. Let me ask you, do you feel more economically secure? Do you feel that we should be relying on our enemies for our oil and gas? Do you feel that our border is open? Do you feel that our neighborhoods are safe? He has produced an agenda of vulnerability. I can take out Sherrod Brown. We need to get to Washington and get things done.
Thank you, Mr. Dolan. Bernie Marino, 30 seconds to you for your closing statement.
I'll end what I started. My mom gave me the gift of bringing me to this country. Built a great life here in America. I'm running because I think career politicians are taking this country off a cliff. We only save this country when we stop sending career politicians to Washington, D.C. That's what we saw with President Trump, the most transformational, best president of our lifetime, an outsider in Washington, D.C. And the reason he's endorsed me, the reason J.D. Vance has endorsed me, the reason Jim Jordan has endorsed me is because they know we need outsiders in Washington, D.C.
Thank you, Mr. Marino. And we want to say thanks to all of you. That concludes tonight's Ohio GOP Senate debate.
Thank you again to the candidates for participating, and thank you for joining us across the state of Ohio. From all of us here at WJW TV studios in Cleveland, have a good evening.